Right, hey y'all, it's Miss Summers with your notes today on human population. The goal today is we want to be able to interpret a population pyramid. We want to be able to tell from those diagrams whether a population is shrinking, growing, or staying the same. And we also want to look at different factors in society that can affect population growth. Okay, so let's start by just assuring ourselves that the world population overall is growing. Okay, it was 7.8 billion, roughly that number today. In a few years from now, it's projected it'll probably get to 8 billion in the next like 10 years or so. It'll continue to grow and grow and grow. All right. So, what I want to do, what I want to start with is we're going to watch a video that shows human population through time, how it's grown. And I want you to pay attention to why the population starts growing rapidly. Okay, what's going on that changes human population? So I'm going to go here to my link. All right, I'm not going to have the little thing playing in the background, but it basically explains, the earth is mostly covered in water. We have a very limited amount of land that we can use. About 17% of land is what we can utilize. And we need that limited resources for things like food, water, space, all that good stuff, okay? So this is going to show the population over the past 2,000 years. Each dot is going to represent 1 million people. Okay? 1 million people. As it goes through, it's going to have, whoops, it already started. It's going to have little thingies down here to kind of tell you what's happening in the world. So this is 19 CE, so right about 2,000 years ago. You can see there's this many millions of people in the world. Okay, and you can kind of see where they're all located. Like India's always kind of been kind of a population density center. Same with China. There's a couple million throughout Europe. A couple here, like throughout the African continent. Like here's the Nile. And then the Americas. Okay, so let's look at what happens. We're going to kind of skip through. Nothing's really happening. Here's the Roman Empire. So you can see Europe kind of, a dot or two pops up because the Romans kind of start making their way all around this region of the world. And they're like, this is fun stuff. Right? Right? Let's skip forward a little bit. So it's kind of staying the same. Nothing crazy's happening. There's a dot here, a dot there. Not a ton is happening in the Americas. People are kind of really spread out. All right, let's fast forward. Let's fast forward even more. All right, so everything's kind of staying relatively the same. Really slow growth. Not a lot's happening. Let's jump forward. No, I don't want the Crusades. Aha, here's where I want. Look at the Mongol invasion. Look at what happens to China. It's the only time. Whoops, that's not good. All right. Ooh, Black Death. Look at Europe, everybody. Look at Europe. Oops. All right. This is when you have a major outbreak of Black Death in the mid 1300s. All right. But we still kind of have like the same, roughly, like, there's a lot of people in India, a lot of people in China, everywhere else, dots are starting to pop up here more and there. That's cool, whatever. The Atlantic slave trade, people were taken very forcefully from Africa to South America and over yonder. All right, so you see more and more dots are starting to pop up as we're getting closer to the modern age. Watch this. Industrial Revolution. We heard our first billion in the 1800s. Look at all these dots, folks. Whee! There's Hawaii. Modern medicine. All right, so now we're in the 1900s. We have antibiotics. We have vaccines, hygiene. All right. Even during the world wars, tons and tons and tons of new people being added. All right. By 2050, we're going to be probably somewhere around 9 billion people. And you can see China and India, those are obviously always going to be kind of our really super dense population centers. Africa has really become very population dense. Same with Europe, the United States, Central America, and the coast of South America. All right. So the question is, okay, why did all of a sudden I go from, the same number of dots everywhere? How come I ended up with a billion dots randomly? Like, how did we get from one place to another. It's not because people started figuring out how to have babies. They've always known that. They've always known that, friends. What happened, the big change that I hope you saw, was the Industrial Revolution and modern medicine. Okay? Those two things caused population to grow very rapidly. All right? The reason is, a long time ago, prior to the Industrial Revolution and modern medicine, okay, people still had babies. They had lots of babies, but not everybody would survive. That was the big difference. With modern medicine, more people are surviving into adulthood and having babies of their own. All right, that's why we have this rapid growth. Okay, now, population, even though the world population is growing, it's actually not growing everywhere. Okay, so we have these population pyramids that we're going to look at for to see where population is growing, shrinking, or staying the same. So when we talk about population pyramids, we're going to talk about fertility rate. Now, I want you to know what that means, just because we're going to use that term. All right, fertility rate has to do with ladies and the average number of children a lady has in her lifetime. So usually it's by country. All right, and it's an average. All right, so this is where, you're like, how do you have 2.5 kids, or how do you have 3.7 kids, or how do you have 1.9 kids? It's because it's an average. So I've given you an example here. I have these 4 ladies. These 4 ladies represent me and my sisters that have children. So my older sister has 2 children. I have 1. And then this is my sister-in-law. She has 3 children. And my other sister-in-law has 1 child. Together, the 4 of us have 7 children. 7 divided by 4 is not an even number. We get a decimal. Okay, that's how the decimals work. Okay? So different places have different fertility rates. It's very, very dependent upon the region that you're in. All right? When we talk about fertility rate, we're going to talk about something called replacement level. Replacement level is 2 children per lady. Okay? The reason it's 2 is because if you've taken biology or health class, it takes 2 people to make 1 baby. Okay, so for instance, let's look at my sister here. Okay, she has 1 child that would replace her, and this second child replaces her husband or her mate. All right, so that's why replacement rate is 2. Replacement fertility rate is 2. Keep that in mind. Okay, so let's look at some pictures, because I like pictures. Population pyramids. Okay, these are the pictures I need you to be able to interpret. I need you to be able to tell me what the picture means. So a population pyramid is a visual of a population based on their sex and age. Okay, so males and females, and then how old are you? So guys will be over here on the left-hand side. Gals will be over here on the right-hand side. And it's set up by age. The younger people are down here, so like 0 to 4 years old are this bottom bar right here. And then these are like 5 to 9. This is like elementary school age, middle school, young adults, 20-year-olds, and then middle age, and then you get your old folky stokies up here at the top. Okay? It's broken up by sex, female and male, because that ratio is kind of important to figure out how the population is going to change in the future. Because to have like babies, you need to have some gals and guys. So if like you're missing like a whole bunch of one or the other, like, that gets a little kind of like with the sea turtle question with climate. If you have too many of one, not the other, it becomes a problem. Okay? So let's take a look at our first population pyramid. So we have 3 patterns we're going to look at. Our first pattern is the rapidly growing populations. Okay? If we look at this graph, what we're going to see is there's a whole bunch of babies, a whole bunch of very young people, like children ages 0 to about 19, 0 to 14, whatever, these bottom 3 or 4 bars. And then it narrows off very quickly. Okay? It's a true pyramid-looking shape. Okay? So what does this mean about that place? Okay, in a rapidly growing population, here are some things that you're going to see. You're going to have a very wide base, a lot of young people, these young people have not had their bibis yet. Okay, they are still bibis themselves. They will grow up and have their own bibis. Okay? In a population that's rapidly growing, you have a high fertility rate. Okay? So there are places, overall, global fertility has gone down, which is kind of an okay thing. That's not horrible by any means. All right, but there's still places where, on average, a lady will have, 4, 5, 6, 7 kids. Okay, and the question becomes, well, why? Why would a woman have 5, 6, 7 kids? Okay, there are people out there, like my family. I'm one of 8 because my parents decided they wanted to have 8 kids, so that's what they did. All right, but in a lot of places, if you have very high fertility rates, it's because women particularly lack access to things like healthcare and education. Okay, so there's some places, so y'all watching this are probably mostly freshmen, okay, which means y'all are about 14 years old. There are some places on earth still today where if you're a 14-year-old female, you would probably be expected to get married. And your family, depending on where you are, your family may choose your spouse for you and be like, listen, this is a good family. You're going to go live with them. And you would be married at 14 and you'd have your first kid by the time you were 16 and another one by the time you were 18. All right? Because you maybe grew up in a place where you didn't have educational opportunity. Your family couldn't afford to pay to send you to school. Okay, they couldn't afford health care, which includes things like family planning, contraception, stuff like that. Okay? The problem with a rapidly growing population, okay, if you are consistently doubling your population very quickly, is that you're going to use up stuff faster than you can replace it. So you get an issue with, is there going to be enough food? Is there going to be enough water, enough space? Even things like enough jobs, all right? India is currently the biggest country in the world. India is kind of interesting because it's so big. It's kind of like the United States in that aspect where different regions are really different. So like in southern India, it's very similar to kind of what it is in the US or Europe or the European Union, where you have relatively small families, a lot of economic opportunity. But in the northern part of India, which is still very, very, it's not as well developed, I suppose. They're continuing to grow their population, but there's not going to be enough jobs for everybody eventually. And if there's not enough jobs, you have poverty, and poverty just kind of influences this. If you're in poverty, you can't get healthcare, you can't get education, the cycle continues. Okay? So that's rapidly growing. Lots and lots and lots of people at the bottom, very few people on top. Our next pattern is the stable or slowly growing populations. All right? So you'll note here, instead of having a whole bunch of people at the bottom and it tapering off, it kind of goes straight up. Okay? So this looks more like a column instead of a pyramid. All right? Fertility rate is at replacement in these populations. So on average, each lady is having about two youngins. All right? That's enough to replace both parents. All right, so eventually the population doesn't really change that much. All right, you can have countries that can be slowly growing or stable that have a fertility rate less than 2 if immigration makes up for it. So in the United States, we're a country that is founded upon and is very, very much a part, or immigration is very much a part of our national identity. All right. Women in the United States, on average, have less than 2 children per lady, but because we have so many folks coming in from other places, it makes up for that loss in population, so everything stays good, which is nice. Okay, because if your population shrinks, that's actually a bad thing. All right, the United States is a slowly growing. France is stable. At one point, France was shrinking. They weren't adding enough people, so they're like, how do we get people to add more people? And turns out it's really easy to convince people to have bibis. All you got to do is give them like a tax break and be like, here's a monetary like reward. We'll make it easier for you. And they're like, okay, there's bibis. Have a good day. All right. So this is kind of ideally what we want to get to. This magical two children per woman fertility rate is kind of ideal. All right. Our last pattern is the shrinking population. And you might be like, well, rapidly growing isn't good, so shrinking must be the opposite, right? No, shrinking can be just as not great. Okay? So the difference in this pyramid, you will note, instead of it being a pyramid that goes up like that, where it's really wide at the bottom, or a column that goes straight up, this is kind of like an upside down triangle. So it's very narrow at the bottom, and you have a lot of people in the middle age and older. Okay? So the most people that you have, the biggest chunk of your population is already done having bibis. They are no longer going to add bibis. After a certain age, people are like, no more bibis. Ain't got time for that. Respect it. All right, in these populations, fertility rate is below replacement. So on average, each lady has less than 2 children, so that's not enough to replace her and her mate. The big issue with shrinking populations, it can have devastating economic impacts. Okay? Because old people do not work forever. Okay? Old people obviously don't work forever because they get old. They don't want to keep working. They already did their work. They're done. Retirement, they want to go rest, which makes sense. You know, you get older, you're not as quick as you used to be. You know, you should enjoy your golden years. But if you have a shrinking population where you have a lot of old people and not a lot of young people, there's not enough new workers to replace people that are retiring. So if there's not enough workers, that means you have less people making money that are going to pay taxes. If you learned anything, or if you're in civics and economics right now, you've probably learned about things like Social Security. Okay, which started back in the 30s or 40s, I believe. FDR was the president that was like, yo, we need this. Social Security is basically something you pay into when you work and that you take out of when you're an old person or when you're older or no longer able to work. Okay? My Social Security that I'm paying right now is going towards the old folky stokies who are retiring, which is cool. You know, they deserve to retire. All right? If there's not enough young people, that money in Social Security gets used up really fast and now it's not being replaced. Okay? Japan is having a major issue with this. So Japan was hit by a recession about 25, 30 years ago. And they just kind of never, it was really hard for them to kind of break out of it. So you ended up with families, like husbands and wives, that were like, okay, we both have to work full-time jobs, so we can't afford to raise a kid. All right, raising children is very expensive. If the economy is not doing great and you're not making a ton of money, you're not going to have enough money to, like, you know, send a bunch of kids to college or to school or whatever. You're going to hold off on having kids. All right, so instead of having 2 or 3 kids, maybe you only have 1, or maybe you don't have any at all. All right. The economy really has a big influence on this. Okay? So, population growth and healthcare. Again, ideally, the magic number we want that fertility rate of like 2 children per lady over her lifetime. 2 big factors that I want you to like look at is education and healthcare. How do those things matter? Why do those things matter? All right, so I picked these two visuals. Obviously, this issue is super complicated. There's lots of different factors, societal, you know, what are the social norms, religious norms, all that good stuff. Okay, but these things kind of are across the board. You know, in different places, these things kind of come through as being big factors. Education, particularly among women, among the ladies, affects on average how many children that lady has, okay? If a woman has more access to education or economic opportunity, okay, that generally is going to lower fertility rate. Generally. Again, this is general average. Does that mean saying if you like have a college degree that you can't have more than 2 kids? Obviously not. That's not what we're saying. We're saying women have the opportunity to do other stuff besides just have babies, okay? The other thing I want to look at is healthcare, infant mortality rate, and fertility. Okay, so infant mortality rate is how many babies out of, I think it's 100,000, how many of those babies don't make it to their first birthday, and how does that affect fertility rate? And as you can see, the higher your infant mortality is, the more babies that you have that don't make it, the higher the fertility rate is. So here in Afghanistan, you have a super hot, this was back in, when was this? I don't know if this was back in like 2015, or maybe when, there was still like a war going, I mean, there's still conflict there. But generally in places, if you have a high infant mortality rate, there's a pressure to have more children, okay? Because you're under the assumption that some of them aren't going to make it. So it makes having more children more valuable, okay? So if we can work to improve healthcare, okay, in these places like Nigeria, Somalia, okay, parts of the Middle East, all right? If your infant mortality goes down, all right, the pressure to have really, really big families lessens, all right? People are able to say, all right, we're going to have 2 kids and we're going to make sure that both of them survive or whatever, okay? So that is how society can influence population growth. We've looked at our 3 population pyramids. Your job now, you're going to go look at two population pyramids in your assignment. I've made a second video for you to watch today. Please watch that before you attempt the assignment. If you have any questions, watch the video. Watch the video there. I probably answered it for you. And if you have any other questions, you are free to email me. And I hope you have a great day.